I took hold of some window bars and pulled up to a standing position on the sill. I reached over and grabbed the drain pipe. I swung over and shimmied up to the roof. I looked to my left. I could see the silhouetted figure of the wall screw in his cubicle. I looked across and up at the cell house roof abutting the wall. It was a long way. I walked across the roof toward the next building. I was near the far edge of the roof. I looked back at the wall cubicle. The screw was out walking the wall. He had that deadly rifle cradled in his arms. I flung myself flat on my back on the black roof. I hoped I was invisible to him. I lay there panting. I wondered what a screw's manual said about an escaping con target. If he saw me, would he scope for a skull, heart, or gut shot? Finally, he went back into the cubicle. Lucky for me, the mess hall roof was connected to the chapel building. The connection was a concrete ledge. It was less than a foot wide and about 12 feet long. My heavy prison brogans seemed as wide as the ledge. They slipped on the glazed ledge. The wild late April winds made the walk as secure as a stroll across a teeter-totter 2 stories above the ground. I stood at the end of the ledge and looked up. I stretched my right arm up and stood on tiptoes. The chapel roof was 2 feet above my fingertips. I'd have to go back a few feet on that glassy ledge. I'd have to get up enough speed coming back to make a 2-foot leap. I'd have to grab the outside rim of the roof's drain gutter. I wondered if it could stand my weight. I carefully backed up 6 feet. I stood there trembling, looking at the rim. I looked back. The screw wasn't on the wall. I had to forget how narrow the ledge was. I threw a leg out. I whipped the other toward it. I pumped them over the gritty glaze. I heard the whispering hiss of the leather soles tromping the ledge. My arms were outstretched to the black sky. My eyes were riveted upward to the gutter rim. I leaped upward. I felt my feet soar off the ledge. I taloned the rim. I hung from its dangling in space. My fingernails sent red-hot needles of pain through the tortured flesh at their roots. I chinned up and hurled a leg across the rooftop. I rolled onto it. I lay there, gasping, as I watched the rifleman walk his beat. He went in. I struggled up the steep, sloping roof to the top. The edge of the cell house roof was 3 feet away. I leaped straight ahead. I flopped on my belly. The tips of my brogans were in the drain gutter. The cell house roof was even steeper. It was coated with square, slippery shale. I looked up toward the top. It seemed a city block away. I started bellying up it. I dug my brogan tips into the small cracks between the shale squares. I finally inched to the top. My chest was flaming. I lay astraddle the 6-inch top of a double precipice. The 2 sides of the roof formed a steep pyramid. I was on top of it. The 6-inch top seemed as thin as a wire. Through a dizzy haze, I saw the lights of the city, winking in an ocean of blackness. I got to my feet. I started walking the tight wire like a circus performer. The winds were savage up here. They kicked and punched me. I teetered and swayed on the wire. I looked down over the right precipice to the street far below. Through a fuzzy blur, I saw auto headlights darting through the night like tiny fireflies. My skull almost blacked out. I jerked my skull away and glued my eyes to the wire. It was like an age before I reached the end of the cell house. If the screw came out now, I'd be in full view, even from the inside. He could spot me. I stood shivering. I looked down 20 feet to the top of the 3-foot wide wall. I couldn't turn back. I couldn't just stand there. It was a cinch I couldn't expect to keep balance if I hit the wall feet first. I dropped, legs opened wide. I heard my trousers rip. The inside concrete edge of the wall top gouged into my inner thigh. My rear end crashed against the concrete. My skull reeled in pain as I sat in the cold saddle. I swung my gouged left leg from the inner side of the wall. I scooted back on my belly to my fingertips. I hung there for a moment. I felt blood running down my left leg into my shoe. I let go. I struck feet first. My butt and back took the rest of the shock. I lay there on my back in a drunken fog of exhaustion, pain, and breathless joy. It was at least 10 minutes before I could stand. I limped away for 100 yards. I turned and looked back at the joint. I thought, those dirty white folks are gonna pace the floor. Their assholes are gonna twitch. They're gonna call me a million black nigger bastards and son of a bitches. One thing they can't deny in their cruel secret hearts. I outsmarted them. It's gonna hurt 'em to the rotten quick that a nigger did a black Houdini out of here. No screws is skull busted and no bars sawed. They're gonna foul their chances to catch me after the midnight count. They'll search the yard and joint for a week. Their asses will turn blue. Their skulls won't let 'em believe a nigger was clever enough to ghost out of here. I turned and hobbled toward the state of Indiana. Chapter 19. The Ice Pick. I was lucky. I caught 5 rides to get to my aunt. It was 5 minutes to midnight when she opened the door. At first, she didn't recognize me. She made me welcome. In a week, my leg had healed, and I felt strong. Her husband was my size. He gave me an outfit and $50. I went to the horse section of town. A bunch of New Orleans pimps were in town. They had their thieving whores with them. 3 days later, I stole one. Her name was No Thumbs Helen. She was at the time one of the slickest from-the-person thieves in the country. We got about in a 47 hog. She was a magician. For almost a year, she left a trail of empty wallets across 5 states. We were in Iowa when Helen stung a rich sod buster for $7,200. I was in bed when she threw it on the bed. Excited? Sure I was. My heart boomed like bombs going off. She didn't know it. I was icy cool. I casually scooped it up and counted it. I had a poker face. I said, "Now listen, bitch. Run this thing down. I gotta know how hot this scratch is. Did you get all the sucker had? I'll be a salty son of a bitch to read in the papers that you missed the bundle." A rundown told me it was best to split. We got in the hog and went to Minneapolis. The second day, I copped a young whore. She wanted to be a thief. I took her to Helen at our hotel. Helen chilled when she saw the pretty bitch. She blew her top. She drew her knife. The young whore fled. I disarmed Helen and punched her around. Helen went to work. I fell asleep. I woke up fast. Helen was jabbing her knife into me. I rolled away. She had stabbed me in the forearm and the side of an elbow. I took a golf club and knocked her out. I never tried to stable her after that. I didn't feel like a real pimp with one whore. I decided to steal the technique of stealing from Helen. I could use it to train other whores when I cut her loose. Finally, I picked her skull. The technique went as follows. She would lurk in some shadowy doorway or alley entrance. When a trick came by, she'd go into a con act. She'd stand wide-legged and bend her knees to an almost squatting stance. She'd whip up the front bottom of her dress. She'd expose the gaping, hairy magnet to the bugging eyes of the sucker. The pull was magnified by her stroking her cat. She'd say to the sucker, "Pretty please, sweetie, I'm so hot, this pussy is burning up. I ain't had no dick in 6 months. Come here and do something to it." He'd step into the doorway, already blind hot to sock it in for free. His instinctive weariness blackjacked to sleep, by the raw event. She'd bombard the sucker with a flow of sweetly passionate, sexy bullshit as she tightly embraced him. She had located his wallet, usually in a rear trouser pocket, with the sensitive tips of her fingers. She'd dryly grind her belly against his scrotum. She'd complain that his belt buckle was hurting her. She would be panting in phony passion as she unbuckled it. It would release the tension on his pants pockets. She'd caress the head of his swipe with her fingers. She'd stroke the tip of his ear with her tongue. The very tips of the airy light index finger and thumb of the free hand flicked the buttoned pocket open. The index and middle fingers scissored on the wallet and slid it from the pocket. The trick would be excited and hot. He wouldn't have felt the glowing end of a cigarette on his ass. With both hands behind his neck, she'd remove the scratch from the hide. She'd up the sexy chatter and the strong grind against his scrotum. She'd roll the bills into a tight suppository shape. She'd slip the wallet back into the pocket. She wouldn't forget to rebutton the pocket. She was ready to blow the sucker off, get rid of him. She'd crack that she had to pee. Stooping quickly, she'd ram the rolled bills up her cap. She'd sight a passing car. She'd fake alarm. She would say, "Oh, my God, there's Riley, the vice cop. Listen, honey, go to the Park Hotel up the street and register as Mr. and Mrs. Jones. I will be there in 10 minutes, pretty daddy. I sure want some of your good dick." The sucker would pat the reassuring bump of his wallet. It was still there, in the buttoned pocket. He'd amble off to the hotel. The thief would make it home. She'd completely change her appearance. She'd go back into the street to sting another sucker. There was an accident. She got pregnant. I found a croaker who made her one again. The game went down as usual. The bubble burst in a small town in Ohio. The skyrocket came crashing down. Then I ran into an old pal. He was now called New York Joe. I hadn't seen him since I was 14. My mother had taken him in for a few weeks when his widowed mother died. He got sick and he had to go to a hospital. I'd take a bus to see him and bring him tidbits. I'd sit with him and console him. I liked him. Our friendship was brief. He got out of the hospital and left town. He was wholesaling cocaine, and the sample he gave me was almost pure. I made an appointment to cop a piece. I didn't know he had learned in New York to cross everybody, even old friends. I found out the stuff he gave me was phony. I rushed back to him, figuring he had made a mistake and would square things with me. I said, "Joe, you've made a mistake, man." He took me inside. He said, "What's the trouble, Jim?" I said, "Man, this is bullshit. This ain't the same stuff that I sampled." He said, "Well, listen, Ronald went out to the stash. That motherfucker is crossing me." He drew his gun from a shoulder holster. At the time, I didn't know it was all con. He said, "Should I go out there and kill that son of a bitch? What do you want me to do?" He started working his eyes. His eyes were bugging and going through all that crazy act. I said, "No, man, just give me my scratch back." He said, "I'm so mad, I should croak you both." I was relatively young,